Hi, welcome to the archive. So this episode is called, it's actually quite long. Um, it's part one of two. It's called What If Instead Jay-Z and the Black Elite modeled what it's like to build shame resiliency. And specifically, I'm talking about shame resiliency around participating in capitalism. So let me get going. The washer is on, so you might hear it in the back. Okay, so shame and the use of the term shame as well as the felt emotion, it seems to have jumped all out of Jay-Z's clip that everybody's talking about, if that was even him. I wasn't going to bring it up and talk about it because others have said what needs to be said, plus outrage sells, and I'm really just here trying to mind my own business and not have anybody raise my blood pressure, including celebrities who are paid and are flourishing, while I sit here talking about them for free. So, but here we are. Here we are as I'm jumping on the bandwagon again, late to the party and the game as always. I want to start this blog by saying that it's not clear, at least to my understanding, um, if it's been confirmed whether or not this is actually Jay-Z in the clip. So I want to acknowledge that. We can't see his face, though the voice sounds to be like his. It's also important to note that there are impersonators who also sound like him too. I'm sure it is him, but a part of me still is in denial that he's still stuck in that kind of a narrative. I want to believe that he's evolved in a way that gets all of us creatively thinking about new solutions rather than getting stuck in the same old conversations of like calling him in or calling him out. It's easier to think that someone is impersonating him at this point. But reality. So also want to acknowledge that I'm very much stuck in a lot of different things myself. So like I'm not bringing this from a place of judgment because we all know your girl is really stuck. If it is him, I won't say what others have said. Read a book is what some people have said. You can't be a revolutionary and a capitalist at the same time, said Black Twitter. Huey would never, people said, repulsed. Do you even know the history of Black revolutionaries? Others have questioned. And so it's all been said. I'm not going to recreate that reel. Instead, I'm interested in how emotions show up and what it's doing to both Jay-Z and us as listeners. So I study shame. So that's a specific emotion that I want to address here. I'm interested in how did it move Jay-Z to say what he said? How did shame move us as the audience to respond? Because whether we like it or not, shame was present in that Twitter space and it leaped out all over us. In staying in my own lane, I ask, what if Jay-Z and other Black elites, the 1%, the rich and the wealthy, the billionaires, I'm also looking at millionaires, the for real life bourgeoisie with like nothing petite about them, the upper class, the capitalists, call them what you will. What if instead of the defensiveness and the projected animosity back at us, what if they modeled for us what it looks like to build what Brené Brown calls shame resilience? So Dr. Brené Brown defines shame resilience as, and this is a quote, um, a quote from page 4. So she says, shame resilience is the ability to recognize shame, to move through it constructively while maintaining worthiness and authenticity, and to ultimately develop more courage, more compassion, and connection as a result of our experience. Brené Brown goes on to suggest that building shame resilience requires us to talk about our shame, not just to share it with others, but to understand it for ourselves, why shame happens, and to assess the stories that we give to shame and how we make sense of the meanings that we create to ascribe it. So what would it have looked like if Jay-Z were to, instead of talking about how he gets shamed for being a capitalist, which is completely fair. That's how he feels. And he is shamed for being a capitalist, right? We know this. We do this. I do this. What if instead of just saying and that he gets shamed for being a capitalist, he also was able to recognize his shame in being caught up in capitalism as a Black boy who made it out of the hood. I didn't hear that part. All I heard was instead of shaming the Black elite, fair enough. But also, what about what if like he was to recognize that there is some sort of shame that he grapples it with? What would it have looked like for him to move through that shame constructively in a way that still maintained his worthiness and his authenticity, as Brené Brown suggests? Would his message have landed differently for us? Would it have created more connection? I don't know. It's just a hypothesis, and these are questions I'm asking as a shame researcher. Because as a Black poor girl or woman who has dreams of accumulating enough resources and wealth so I can generate intergenerational wealth for myself, my lineage, and my communities that have raised me both abroad and here, I can keep it real about how my own shame and my financial trauma shows up when I'm having these conversations. I'm honest that it's shame that has me critiquing people like Jay-Z the way that I do, right? It's not just the books, it's not just about facts. There is emotions that come into that. I can be honest about that. Why can't you? I can't always separate bitterness that rears its head, nor can I disavow the disgust and resentment that I feel sometimes towards rich people. To act like these emotions don't show up is dishonest, right? Even if I'm engaging in as an intellectual conversation that is not emotional, right? But that's exactly it. There is no binary between logic and emotions. I mean, I hate to break it to you, right? The history has taught us that there's this dualism. There really isn't. Um, Reason and rationality operate within an affective economy. I can say that shame comes up for me even if I'm reaching towards the very same things that I take an issue with, right? You can do both at the same time. You can have those contradictions at the same time. It's complicated, yes. Is it complex? Yes, we know this. But others, but like other than people like Brené Brown, no, not Brené Brown. I mean, Brené Brown, yes, but other than folks like Laverne Cox is who I was talking about. Laverne Cox often references Brené Brown a lot in Brené Brown's work. Oprah is who put Brené Brown on, so Oprah as well too. But other than folks like that who are freely and talking openly about shame and vulnerability, so rarely do I ever see folks in Jay-Z's positions, billionaires, celebrities. It's very rare for them to keep it real about how they negotiate messy emotions on their way up. Or even right now to date. It reminds me of when Kim Kardashian said that nobody wants to work anymore, that whole thing. It's a very simple statement which was loaded with a lot of historical and socio-political meaning, and we needed to unpack that. But there was this force, there's an emotional force behind what she said that I think many of us also felt, right? As a highly sensitive person, there are a lot of emotions in that clip, as subjective as emotions are. So I want to note here that like I can read Kim's message as disgust is what I'll talk about soon, but like for somebody else, it might have been completely different. That's because emotions are subjective, and I talked about that in the previous post looking at shame. So to me, it seemed that there's a lot of disgust behind that nobody wants to work anymore. There was, in my opinion, bitterness and resentment that is uncomfortable for a lot of us to admit, right? Nobody really wants to be like, yeah, I'm jealous, because that makes you look awful. That makes you look like a bad person, right? It's uncomfortable for us to keep it real about our complicated emotions. It makes us look like bad people. Shame specifically makes us is this notion that we are bad, right? Guilt is I have done bad. Shame is I am bad. Nobody wants to feel like that. And so we just pretend that it's not there. We're not ashamed. We don't feel jealous. We're not resentful. Totally not bitter. Not at all. But nobody wants to work. Yeah, maybe. And I understand this especially for celebrities who are held on a pedestal and have to keep like a very particular, you know, right? It's uncomfortable to be like, you know what? I resent that I'm busting my ass and you all are laying around resting at home. It's uncomfortable to be like, I'm jealous that I don't have the luxury to not work. She does. It's very uncomfortable to be like, I hate that you get to be lazy while I'll grind my ass off. And a lot of this is all of this unsaid tension underneath these like generational battles, sex wars. Like there's all of this we can't talk about these different uncomfortable emotions. We see it right now, like the boomers hate the Gen Zs for being lazy. Like, there's also jealousy, there's resentment, there's pain, right? If you grew up working 3 jobs, busting your ass to provide for your family, and now those kids that you provided for are just like laying on the couch watching TV like I did for the last 3 days, that's gonna bring some stuff up. Whether you want it to or not as a parent, it's gonna bring stuff up. And I think we don't know how to talk about that stuff that comes up, and so we just pretend it's not there. Totally good people. We are not jealous. We are not bitter at all. Um, Hardly ever do these celebrities name their shame, which is why I love when Laverne Cox goes on Instagram and talks about it. But it's also very uncomfortable that it's a black feminist, that it's a trans woman, that it's a non-binary folks, that it's a queer celebrities that are pushing these conversations forward. And with a lot of backlash as well too, might I add. Because most think it's self-sabotaging, most think it's cringe, it's not worthy of losing your money over, it's terrible for public persona, it's emotional manipulation, you're guilt tripping people, yuck, ew, gross emotions, not emotions. Well, I mean, instead, they do what most dominant classes do, and then they end up projecting it back onto us, right? They do like Brené Brown says and fight shame with shame. They punch down and shame poor people instead. Nobody wants to work, says Kim. What are you doing for the movement, Jay-Z asks us. It's petty, right? But to be clear, all of us are to some extent. The only thing is, those with power will always win the petty award. I will always say that. And also, is that what we want for ourselves? Like, if you call yourself a revolutionary, like, are we going to take the petty approach? It's human, but is that actually the most productive means to get forward? And I ask that knowing that I don't always make the most productive, whatever that means, um, strategic ways forward, right? But is fighting shame with shame what will move us forward? Yes, to a certain extent, I think it is, which is why Jay-Z made that comment. I think he knows exactly what it is that he's doing. But like again, I don't have a platform like Jay-Z, right? I don't have billions of dollars to enact that kind of change. I'm not in a room. I can't even afford a room right now, right? So like I do have some questions for you, sir. And my questions are like, what if you paused and worked through, with us or not in private, how us shaming you informs how you approach the work you do? Does the shame motivate you more? Does it annoy and irritate you? Does the shame make you want to hate poor people even more? Um, does it distance you from us? How is shame honestly moving you and subconsciously getting you to move through this world? Call me nosy, but like I'm a shame researcher, so I'm interested in that. I do want to know. Because how billionaires negotiate their shame or whether they don't, that affects all of us. The shame likely trickles down if they're not willing to be able to face it, because it goes somewhere. Shame just doesn't disappear because we refuse to look at it. It has to go somewhere. We need to move it somewhere. There's actually a lot of work that goes into keeping certain emotions at bay, which is a topic I'll talk about shortly. Um, but oftentimes what happens is shame gets projected onto the subordinate person. So within, if we're talking about racial divide, Jack Habersam's work talks about how white shame gets projected onto the black body. In order to like look away from shame, again, you can't look away from shame without redirecting it to somebody else. So if you're not willing to look at your shame, celebs and billionaires and millionaires or whoever, where is that shame going? It's coming back to us, which we then project it back to you, and then it becomes this back and forth cycle, and we're not getting nowhere. So can we start talking openly and honestly about what shame is doing to us? Because it's doing something to us. And what it's doing to us is separating and dividing us, because that's what shame does to us. If we're not aware of shame, it's going to separate and divide us. So we need folks like Jay-Z to be more transparent about his emotions. I'll go first. I feel survivor's guilt for wanting to move up in my career. I'm sure those that are ahead of me have also dealt with it. What was that like for you? What did you do with that guilt? How did it show up for you? What did it make you want to do? How did you silence it? Did you address it at all? Or did you, like with grief and other emotions, just put it aside, push it away, repress it, numb it, do overwork? Did you self-medicate? Like, there's no judgment, but give us something to work with. Because billionaires acting stoic, like they don't feel or struggle with emotions, it's doing all of us a disservice. It's not helping anybody. Jay-Z and the Kim Kardashians, most definitely they're in their bags. We get it. You're making your money. You're doing that. We get it. But clearly you're also hurt. Like you're also in your feelings. Um, be real about that. Jay-Z talks about in the clip making Ed and Marcy's projects. Yeah, he talks about how many family members were living in one unit. He knows firsthand poverty, what it's like, more than I do. Um, Therefore, he was critiquing the system. He knows that it's flawed, right? He sets it up. He knows, and he says that it's set up for us to lose. He talks about that in the clip. He's been critical of capitalism, even though maybe now he doesn't want to call it capitalism because he's a capitalist. So logically, then transitioning to being in the same rooms as those that you used to talk shit about or who you used to critique, that must be jarring. As somebody who's trying to be in certain rooms now, who critiques these same rooms, who wants and who people knows that once she gets in that room, she's gonna, right? What was that like? We need these models. We need you guys to keep it real about how hard it is to negotiate some of that tension within yourselves. Right? Because acting like, well, you guys can't call me a capitalist because I'm trying to bring the hood. I'm trying to. We get it. We get it. Thank you. We get it. And also, what is it like to negotiate that discomfort, sir? And I don't mean his son. Um, Yeah, that clip, I think it didn't move. I don't personally don't think it moved the needle forward. I think if anything, it separated and divided us more. I'm asking that you be more vulnerable with us. Tell us the truth about how you feel ashamed, or how that shame, projected shame, makes you feel. Not that we necessarily either care. I might get into it later because, like, to be honest, most of us don't actually care to hear celebrities complaining about how their wealth is making them feel shame. Like, we talk about it, but we're still probably going to get pissed off, just to keep it real, right? But that's part of the messiness that comes to the conversation. Audre Lorde talks about that, right? You, at the risk of being misunderstood, you still have to speak anyways. uh what was it like feeling like a sellout? What does he remember, that first moment where he felt like, yeah, ooh, I feel like a sellout? Did that ever happen? Because I'm sure it crossed your mind. It crosses my mind, and I'm broken poor. You know what I mean? It's just because, like, there's a certain, I hate the word elevation because it still connotes hierarchies. But you get to a point where you're like, I sold my soul to the devil for money. Like, I've had that. As somebody who just finished my PhD and did not know how to work with the powers that I was given, as somebody who lives in the nation's capital and can feel all of that power, and how so many of us fumble power when we get it, we abuse power when we get it. Little old me, I could be like, it's uncomfortable to be like, yo, I did my community dirty and I haven't even made it yet. What was that like for you? You can't tell me you haven't had that moment. You've had that moment, which is why you catch feelings when we call you a capitalist. Call me crazy, or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, right? But unless you have that conversation, I think it's very hard for people like myself to connect. You're losing your audience. It's not as relatable. It just ends up triggering and pissing us off. It makes us angry and irate. You come off as more of a sellout. I trust you less. It's annoying. Just as people get annoyed with me, I get annoyed with others as well too. Surprise, surprise. Um, do I come off like an angry hater? Most definitely. Absolutely. They're gonna be like, oh, she's a fucking hater because she's broken poor and Jay-Z made it and she didn't make it and now she's trying to rip them down. She's trying to burn the black family down. I mean, like, it's predictable what people will say. Again, they're gonna misunderstand you. Speak anyways, right? But, like, also I want you to recognize that this is me naming the emotions. It's not just me being an angry, bitter black woman. It's me being a grown-ass woman saying I can claim and name the emotions that are showing up, even if it makes me look bad. Um, It's also not by force. If you don't want to do this, you don't have to. I'm not telling nobody to do anything they don't want to do. This is 20 minutes, so I want to wrap it up because I have part 2. Okay, so here's why it's important. If we don't name the emotions that show up, it takes power over us. We start to get passive aggressive. We start taking digs. We start hitting below the belt. We start fighting shame with shame. The message gets lost. And ironically, we get in our feelings, which is why it's so important to name and know the emotions that are showing up. It's important to identify them so then we know what's being postponed. We know that like the work is being derailed or collapsed right now because our feelings are in the way. We can't have this conversation because we're too angry. I can't talk to you openly because I feel shame that you're calling me a capitalist. Like, we have to be honest about the emotional stuff that's separating us. I do this all the time. I studied shame and how it gets in my way. And guess what happened? I'm now way more broken poor than I ever was. And not just because I'm a student, but because of the way shame moved me to self-sabotage, because that's what emotions like shame and fear will do. I have very little to no friends, right? I'm struggling to connect with people. And of course, that's a whole point of shame. That's the whole point of my dissertation. This is how emotions like shame get in our way. They distance us. They keep us isolated. They keep us away from people. They disconnect us. They remove us from belonging. Brené Brown's work talks about this, right? Belonging is the antithesis to shame. Pride is the opposite of shame, says Jack Halberstam. Melissa Harris Perry says recognition is how you mediate shame, because shame is misrecognition. So in order to fight shame, we have to do these other things. We have to be in connection. We have to belong. We have to recognize each other for who and what we are. I'm sitting right now in the real life aftermath of how powerful emotions like shame can be and moving us away from one another. That is the affective costs of the work that we do. We need to speak on that more. I hope, I ask, please. More financial literacy, yes, but also emotional intelligence too, because I'm sure that he already knows this, but Jay-Z already knows that emotions are relational by now. He knows that it's moving his audience either closer or away from him, which is likely why he said exactly what he said. I'm going to end it here. There's a second part that I'm going to do. Before I close up, I also want to say that doing emotions work is great, but it's not going to lead us to liberation. And I'm going to talk about that in the next clip. So until next time, in solidarity, and stay tuned.